Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Academy Show on the Liverpool Echo's Blood Red channel, your roundup of everything going on with the Reds' young stars down at Kirkby. I'm your host for today, Patrick Smith, from a very cold northwest of England, and I'm joined by two of the most in-the-know journalists when it comes to the Liverpool Academy. Up first, we've got Liverpool.com editor Matt Addison. Hello, Matt.
Hi, mate. How's things? You good?
Yeah, not too bad. It's absolutely freezing, as I'm sure you're well aware. I think you're bracing for the snow over in Liverpool, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. We were just talking about that off air, weren't we? It's absolutely freezing. Looking forward to playing five-a-side tonight in some ways, but maybe less so in others.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's been a long week for Liverpool without a match. We're desperate for one, aren't we, given we're talking about the weather. But we're also joined then by the Echo's own young starlet in Keifer Macdonald. Welcome along, Keifer.
Afternoon. I'm going to lose that young star one day, aren't I? I think, each week the facial hair's coming along a little bit, so it may just be star next week. But yeah, not too bad. Surviving the cold. As Matt will know, Kirkby is probably the coldest place in the world, so it's quite fitting to be talking about it on such a snowy day. But yeah, looking forward to getting stuck into the everything that's been going on, really.
Yeah, I'm similar as well. I'm nearly turning 24, so my call up for the Liverpool Academy, I don't think I've got much time left for that phone call, shall we say. But anyway, let's get right into it then, shall we? Matt, we'll come to you first. What's the latest then on the Academy? It's been a couple of weeks since we've done one of these shows. So what's news?
Yeah, well, as usual, many things. I won't give away too much of what we're going to talk about through the show. I know we're going to do a one to watch at the end, which is going to be something that's happening a little bit away from Kirkby, but very much involved with one of the players, the young talents coming through. So I won't spoil that and give that away. I know Keifer was at the Porto game in the Youth League, which we're going to come on to. That was last week. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I can't exactly remember when the last time we did this show was, but obviously Liverpool under 18s have been knocked out of the FA Youth Cup as well, the defeat to Ipswich. Disappointing, obviously, to go out of that competition, but it was a very young and inexperienced under 18s team that played in that match. And yeah, it was a team that you'd probably look at and say that Liverpool should beat, but then Ipswich have got fairly decent sort of reputation at academy level. They've come a fair distance in the youth cups in the past. So yeah, disappointing, but I think the big positive really is the UEFA Youth League, and I'm sure we'll discuss that in a lot more detail. But it was fantastic for Liverpool to get through that. Only just managed it on penalties, but I think very much deserved to go through, and it'll be interesting to see next week how they get on against Sporting Lisbon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about this Porto match, shall we then, Keifer? You were there. Unbelievable scenes happen. I think some of our listeners may not be aware of what happened. So if you want to describe how the match went, what happens during the match, because there's quite a big talking point aside from the football, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone will have seen the kind of brawl that went on at the end. And I think that was obviously a bit of a shame in a way, obviously, with it being on TV. And it probably, obviously, it has made the headlines, over the past 7 days. Certainly, maybe taken away from the performance a little bit, which I think is, slightly unfair, given it was a really disciplined performance from Barry Lucas' side. It was kind of a typical kind of cagey European tie. I think, a lot of the teams that do come to Kirkby, you see from the continent, obviously they do like to keep the ball, and they're a bit more disciplined in their approach, and therefore the games are, very rarely will you see a thumping. I know they dispatched of Napoli in the group stages, but very rarely, is it as end to end as some of the Premier League 2 games, and obviously Liverpool went behind early on with a kind of a controversial penalty. Harvey Davies was penalised, and I think everyone at the time thought it was a bit of a bizarre call from the referee, and then having seen it back later on in the night, it kind of confirmed that initial thought. I don't think anyone ever thought it was a penalty, even and that was after about 5 or 6 minutes. But fair play, to lose the side, because after maybe a period of 10 or 15 minutes where they maybe looked a bit vulnerable, they got themselves back in there, and Ben Doak looked bright on the right hand side, and Mel Frandorf on the other wing, and Bobby Clark, they all started to kind of find their groove a bit, and then after the half time, Frandorf drew the sides level. It was a good finish from close range. Kind of came from Doak down the right hand side, and it was a few deflections in the box, and it set up nicely. And then after that, there only really looked like one winner. Liverpool kept knocking on the door. There was a few chances, a few half chances. Frandorf came close again. I think Jayden Danns came close right at the end. His header kind of trickled past the post. And then when it goes to penalties, you're thinking, it's such a lottery, and as much as you can prepare for it, it really is a flip of a coin. And then Doak obviously missed Liverpool's first penalty, and at that point, you're fearing the worst. He was probably Liverpool's best player on the night, even if it wasn't his best game, that we've seen in this season. Obviously, it was only a few days before that he kind of tore Leicester apart. I think he had 5 of the 7 goal involvements in the thrashing in the Premier League too. So, that was kind of disappointing for him, but Liverpool bounced back, and there's a few penalties that Davis would have liked to have kept out. He got a few strong hands to him, but kind of just parried under him and kind of went in. But I think it was Luis Diaz's brother hit the crossbar, and then obviously one was put wide towards the end, and Liverpool won it 6-5. I think it was in the end, so that was really pleasing. And then obviously, as you do get at that kind of level, obviously you do have to remember it's such a young side, and I'm sure we've all been guilty of it when we've played football ourselves. And I'm sure me and Matt have seen it on a Thursday night down at the pits, but there's a bit of gamesmanship there, and that was certainly the case during the penalties, and I think that's what made the tie boil over a bit. And there was 2 red cards shown for the Porto goalkeeper and I think the striker after. And then Luis Kumas was kind of belatedly shown one as he kind of made his way back into the dressing room, but. I'm not sure really what that was for. There was, a bit of chat that maybe he'd instigated it, but I think it was more of a case of the referee felt he has to kind of, even up and not give 2 red cards, but he had to kind of show something in Liverpool's direction. And that was kind of certainly the kind of stance Barry Lewis thought on it. And he wasn't really too sure when we spoke to him what it was for. And, obviously a shame now that he'll miss the game in Lisbon next week. And, in terms of the bigger picture, it is a big blow for Liverpool because, the kind of near is, I think, expected still to miss that one. And he's obviously been a hot shot in Europe this year for the under-19. So, even though Kumas is kind of a young striker coming through, it does put an awful lot of pressure on, the likes of Doak and Frandorf going into that game next week. But yeah, it was a shame, really. I think the brawl, I'm sure people do like to say, I do like to see that. I use that term loosely. It's nice to kind of see that, I suppose that, if you want to call it passion or that fire and desire kind of thing. But I think with it being on TV, it maybe took away from it a bit more, and that was kind of the real shame to it. But apart from that, there was plenty of positives to take. It was a really physical encounter, and you look at the likes of Doak, who are obviously getting targeted at this age group now because they have progressed into the first team, and they are obviously head and shoulders above that kind of level. But the way they are able to keep their kind of temperament and kind of focus on their football, I thought was really pleasing.
Yeah, absolutely. And personally, I don't mind seeing it. I like seeing a young player having that fight quite literally and desire at times, because you tend to get it from some European youth teams, and it's nice to see them not exactly taking it as some English sides are encouraged to do and sort of walk off the pitch. And
I think holding your own is I certainly don't think Liverpool were the instigators, as maybe the referee thought, and for them to kind of do their talking on the pitch and kind of keep their head within the game, which is what they did in the first half and certainly the second half, because without digging the referee out, I thought that kind of early penalty decision, it just kind of opened the game.
Sets the tone, doesn't it? And,
and I know obviously Kirby's, as Matt will know, it's quite compact. So you can always hear what the players think of the officiating, and in his broad Glaswegian accent, Ben Doak was very unimpressed with it, and so was Bobby Clark, and rightly so, to be fair. But the point of that is that they were able to kind of park that to one side, let the football do the talking, and then obviously, it does boil over after the game. But obviously, the job had been done at that stage, and they'd kept the temperament during the 90 minutes. So that was obviously the pleasing aspect of it all.
Yeah, we've said that so many times, haven't we, on this show about this competition? I think is the best by a distance for these young players to learn, and the refereeing, the kind of antics, shall we say, from a couple of little dives and little words that were being said from Porto players to Liverpool. Obviously, you do have to learn how to cope with that and how to deal with it. And yeah, as Keifer says, it spilled over at the end, but that could have maybe come a little bit earlier on. I think particularly when you're at that age, you're trying to impress. It's on the telly. There's maybe a bit of an opportunity to stand out, and things are not going your way. It can be very easy to let that sort of get sidetracked. But yeah, they've got themselves through, and I think that will be a big learning curve, I think, for a number of those young players.
I think just to jump in, speaking, it was obviously last year, but kind of speaking to Mark Bridger-Wilkinson, who's the under-18s manager, and him and Barry kind of alternate in terms of who kind of oversees youth league duties, and he kind of said something similar last year, is that obviously as good as the Premier League 2 is, and competitions like the Youth Cup and stuff, as Matt says, the UEFA Youth League is the one, because you get such a string of different styles to come up against you. You have teams who come for the low block. You have teams that bring the game to you. You have teams that want to who's similar to Liverpool, will kind of set their 23 sides up or their 19 sides up in the same way their first team plays. So obviously Liverpool kind of mirror that 4-3-3. You get the Spanish sides who want to keep the ball and maybe be a bit more progressive in their styles. And you don't get that in the Premier League 2 games. A lot of the time, as evenly matched as the teams can be, you do get very one-sided, thumpings and thrashings, as we've seen with Liverpool at times this season. So I think it just adds a bit of nous to your game and a bit of edge. And as Matt says, you get the different elements with it that all kind of make it the Premier youth competition for the under-19s. And it is really pleasing that they've at least got one more game in that, and hopefully they can get through to the semi-finals.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting, I think, to see. Obviously, it's another test, again, going away from home, travelling, and all of that sort of thing that you've got to get used to. And Sporting, obviously, be a similar-ish team in terms of style, and the kind of game I would expect would be fairly similar next week. But I was just having a look before, and there is a real opportunity for Liverpool. They got to the quarters last year as well. That's the furthest that they've ever been in this competition. They were a little bit unlucky last season. They played Juventus, again, away from home, which is always more difficult. They were in the middle of a number of matches similar to what the first team were, really, with just so many players injured and fatigued and just sort of, having to string together a side. I think guys at Mabaya, from memory, ended up playing on the right-hand side of the front three and missed a couple of chances and didn't really, have the rub of the green. But I think if Liverpool can go into it with, a couple of stronger players, Bobby Clark and Ben Doak in particular, I would say out of those, if they can be involved in that and can have that opportunity to go and play in this one, I think that gives Liverpool a real chance. And if they can get through it, it would obviously be into the semis. That's further than they've ever been before. But you also look at some of the teams that are left in it. There's still, Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid, Borussia Dortmund are still in there. But there's some big teams that have gone out as well. Benfica, they won it last season. They're already out this season. I think Chelsea and Barcelona have won it twice each in the past. They're both out. No one's won it as much as those two teams have. So there is an opportunity. Of course, it's fairly obvious to say if you get to a semi-final, then obviously you've got a chance of going all the way. But it does feel like if Liverpool can maybe take the next step this season, at the very least, by going to Portugal and winning, that will be a big thing. But they will, and they should, with players like Ben Doak. They should give themselves a real opportunity of going all the way.
Yeah, it's absolutely vital for these young players. I think it's such good experience. I mean, as you mentioned there, Matt, it is by no means an easy competition to win as well, and it's a testament that Liverpool have got to this stage. You look at Man City; they got knocked out by, I think it was Hajduk Split, and the millions City have spent on their academy in the past 10 or so years. It just goes to show that Liverpool's conveyor belt of talent continues to rumble on. I mean, Keifer, do you think they can go all the way this year? And the youth side of Liverpool is a good generation we've got here.
It's difficult to say, isn't it? I mean, obviously as you touched on there, obviously City got knocked out, in the last round. It's hard to predict, and especially as well with teams, obviously like the kind of the big European teams where they do have standout talents. In Liverpool's case, you look at Ben Doak and Bobby Clark is probably the two, and I'm sure there'll be their kind of peers like similar to that at Real Madrid and AZ Alkmaar who are potentially they could face in the next round. And obviously at times they've missed games this season because they have been promoted to the first team. So it is quite a hard competition to predict in terms of, where do your priorities lie? If you look at someone like Ben Doak, do you play him in the youth league to kind of, give him that glory, or, do you bring him into the first team and maybe miss those games? So, I can't obviously say that I've seen a lot of Real Madrid, Sporting Lisbon or AZ Alkmaar, but, I think if Liverpool, if they have the strongest team out and, the likes of Doak and Clark are up to it, Frauendorf as well, I think they've got a good chance because the talent is there. And as Matt said, last year the defeat to Juve, I think it was 2 or 3-0 in the end. And in the first half, I think they got to half time, it was 0-0 or it was 1-0. They were still within the game, but it's maybe just that experience and that was maybe lacking. So they have shown that they can go toe to toe with the kind of the big guns in Europe. Obviously, they've beaten Napoli this year. They beat AC Milan last year, Porto as well in recent years. So they have got that on. They have got that on their CV. I suppose it just comes down to the day and whatever. I've kind of sideshowed the question there, and I've kind of sidestepped it quite nicely. But the semi-finals and the finals, for anyone who doesn't know, are held in Nyon, aren't they, in Switzerland, in kind of like a mini tournament. So I suppose that adds to the element as well. There's no home advantage, away advantage kind of thing for either side. It's just I think they're held over 5 days or something. So that obviously plays an element as well. There's always a decent crowd there, especially for the final. So all these kind of things that maybe you don't take into account at first team level. As Matt said, being on the TV, all these kind of things will play into these 17, 18, 19-year-old lads' minds, which so that could obviously have an impact. But as I say, Liverpool have certainly got the talent there. You only need to look at what the players have done in terms of being promoted to the first team this season. And I'm sure Barry and the rest of the coaching staff will more than fancy their chances. But I think Sporting obviously beat Ajax 5-1, didn't they, in the last round? So obviously they're not going to be an easy side. But it's as I say, they've certainly got the players to go there and cause an upset.
Yeah, it seems like a very high quality young side, and it feels like they've got the character as well, I think, to deal with those occasions. As you said, hopefully the semi and the final in Neon Switzerland, I think they'll be more than capable of that. But Matt, as Keifer was mentioning, it's a difficult decision of what to do with these young players. Do you sort of try and slowly bring them into the first team, or do you let them towards the back end of the season get this experience in these big matches? Now, Stefan Bajcetic has recently made the move to becoming a fully fledged first teamer. We've mentioned Clark, Frauendorf, Doak. Now, what would you be doing with those three? Would you definitely keep them with the 21s and the 19s to the end of the season, or would you slowly try and bring them in towards the end of the season in the first team?
I think that the bigger question really is what you do with them next season. I think for the rest of this season, Liverpool really are going to have to win basically almost all of the games, aren't they? In terms of getting into the top four, and that's basically all they've got to play for. Unlike Keifer, I'm not convinced that they've got a chance to pull it back against Real Madrid, but we'll see. I think that the league is going to have to be the big thing really for the rest of this season. So I'd be surprised if any of them really stepped up before then. But then, yeah, it will be really interesting in the summer. We've seen a little bit of reluctance in the past from Liverpool. Obviously, Curtis Jones is the obvious one that never went out on loan, but then Harvey Elliott pushed for it and was allowed to. Tyler Morton this season, I think it'd be interesting to see what happens with him in the summer. Obviously, off the back of a loan deal with Blackburn, we've spoken about him plenty of times as well. He's one that I think has really benefited from going out and playing. But I don't know, with someone like Ben Doak, it probably comes down to what the plan is with Roberto Firmino's succession and that kind of thing. I think if you're maybe Ben Doak or Cade Gordon, maybe you're sort of thinking along the lines of maybe next season there's an extra spot in that forward line. Obviously, Liverpool have brought in Cody Gakpo already. They've got other priorities in terms of the midfield and potentially at centre-back as well in the summer. So possibly the forward line might not be something that they come back and touch on. I think if Liverpool don't go out and buy another senior attacker, I would expect then Ben Doak will stay. And I think he'll probably get a good few minutes. I think Cade Gordon has got a decent chance of that as well. But if Liverpool were to go out and buy someone, maybe that would flip. And maybe you'd think that, a year at the top end of the Championship could be the biggest thing for him. It's almost one of them where you don't quite know yet whether maybe, a few weeks ago I was thinking maybe there's an argument for Firmino to have another 12 months just so that Ben Doak can go and get that loan and then come back the following season. But obviously now we're aware of what that decision has been. Maybe that changes things for him. I think for Frauendorf, I mean, he is a good player, but he's not quite at the level of someone like Ben Doak. I think he would be a little bit of a different case. And Bobby Clark, I suppose, again, the question comes back to what do they do in the summer? I think out of the two, if I had to guess which one was going to go out on loan, I would probably say Bobby would be the favourite. I think Ben Doak is slightly closer to the first team for a couple of different reasons. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see where they went and if, maybe even for someone like Bobby, it might be that you go abroad. It might be that you go and maybe do a year in Germany or something like that. I think that would maybe be almost more suitable, really. But at the same time, we have seen success with Harvey Elliott and Tyler Morton at Blackburn, so maybe that's an option as well. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. But out of the two of them, I think probably the biggest chance of sort of a first team senior impact next season would be Ben Doak.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important, to get those loan moves right as well. As you said, you want to make sure they go to the right club at the right league. You don't want them to be getting physically battered at a young age and playing 40 matches in a season, because that can sometimes hold to their development, I suppose. Keifer, just quickly, I mean, what would you do with those three, Doak, Gordon and Clark? And then also I understand you've had a chat with Barry Lutis about Cade Gordon as well, because he's recovering from an injury, I still believe, isn't he? Is he on the way to recovery now?
Yeah, it's a bit of an unusual case with Cade Gordon at the moment. Obviously, he hasn't played since last February, so he's obviously been out for the best part of 13 months now. And obviously, he has still been involved with the first team. Obviously, he is still considered a first team player. Obviously, went on the tours in the summer. Missed the first tour, but went to Austria for the second training camp. And he was involved in Dubai in December during the World Cup period. I think that was just as Liverpool have done before with players in a normal season, as we've seen with Van Dijk, just a change of scenery and kind of make them still feel involved with the team. But it is an issue with his pelvis, and I've been told that it's kind of linked to kind of growing pains. And I think, Steven Gerrard kind of suffered with something similar during his career, obviously not to the extent that he's missed, obviously, 12 months like Kate Gordon has. But in terms of him making a comeback, they've just refused to kind of put a time scale on it in the sense of, obviously he's still, 17, 18, he's still young, he's still eligible for the youth team. I think, I would be surprised if we saw him play again this season. I mean, obviously there's 2 months left of the campaign, and it's probably similar to Luis Diaz in that sense of you're not going to get the best version of him now if he does come back. So it's probably about building him up for next season and making sure that, what they do now, sets the foundations in place with his fitness. So there isn't any setbacks next season, because that's so important. Because I think, if he was to have another spell on the sidelines next year, then you're almost looking at, 18 months, 2 years since he's played. And then there's that psychological barrier as well. But, Barry said that he was in good spirits and his recovery was coming on really well. And he was hopeful that he could maybe, play 1 or 2 games or certainly appear from the bench between now and the end of the season. But he kind of refused to put a timescale on it, which is obviously completely understandable. But I think he's become obviously something of is a forgotten figure, really, obviously, with the emergence of Ben Doak. I think Ian Doyle told me last week that he was the youngest player to start a semi-final for Liverpool, obviously, when he started at Arsenal, and he was obviously 17 at that time. And I think, he did impress, and obviously Klopp and Pep Linders have spoke highly of him, and obviously it is kind of, the way the world works now is, when you get a shiny new toy, you tend to forget about, your previous ones, and you kind of just throw it to the side. But, there is still a brilliant player in there. And as myself and Matt have watched plenty of him down at the academy, he's really exciting and maybe a different kind of player to Doak in a sense. I don't think he's as direct. Maybe he's a bit more, maybe a bit, I'd say Doak he's quite raw in the sense of everything is very direct, straight at the defenders, step overs and beat the man, burst down the line. But I think Kate Gordon's a bit more, not polished. I don't want to do a disservice. But
Ben Doak's the Buzz Lightyear, Keifer, isn't in your analogy?
Yeah, I think Kate, I don't know if it's just because he's left-footed, and he's just a bit more kind of, graceful and that kind of thing, cuts inside a lot and all that, and looks to link up play a bit more. But, he's certainly an exciting player and one that, I think obviously when you talk about Roberto Firmino leaving and players who can step up next season, I think he's certainly, an option, maybe not straight away, because, you'd imagine, he's going to take a bit of time to build his match fitness up again. And so that'll be done during the summer. But I think him and Doak could certainly, between them, fill that void. And if not, maybe one of them does go on loan to the Championship and maybe get that game time. But I think, as Matt said, it's quite hard to call at the moment because, I think if you take Harvey Elliott as example the other year, and obviously comes back from Blackburn, has a really good spell at kind of the bottom half of the Championship, but he's a really bright spark in that kind of struggling Blackburn side. And even that summer, there was still umming and ahhing. I think the jury was still out on whether he'd go out on loan, and he kind of had that stay in Austria with the first team. I think they did a month-long camp, and by the end of it, Klopp was fully convinced and kind of tweaked him into this central midfielder. And I think Klopp will have a look at all the youth players as kind of Linders and himself have said at the time. They use the summer to kind of examine, and I think then decisions will be made. At the end of July, maybe start of August, to as the new season kind of comes up, who is kind of suitable to come into the first team setup on a more permanent basis, and maybe who could do with a year away. But yeah, I think as Matt says, Frauendorf maybe. You'd struggle to see making the grade at Liverpool, just because I think purely, as a forward, it is the hardest position to break into, and I think, he doesn't have a standout quality as Doak, as I said, he has the raw kind of pace and that kind of, just that sheer directness, and I think, that makes him different, and he's built very big for his age. I've said to quite a few people that he reminds me of Wayne Rooney when you watch clips of him when he burst into the scene with Everton. He's quite stocky at such a young age. He can hold his own, and that's certainly the impression you get, and you've seen with Doak when he's played in the first team. So I would maybe say Frauendorf is maybe due a loan next season. I mean, there was rumours of Clark going on loan to the Championship. I think Preston were mentioned in the January window, so something like that could maybe suit him. I mean, he's a fine player. He's obviously, we saw him at Derby County in the League Cup just before the World Cup break, and he kind of just glides on the pitch, and everything he does just seems effortless, and he's brilliant at breaking the lines and finding Doak on the right or Frauendorf on the left, and Yeah, he's a brilliant player. And I think he genuinely has a shot at making it at Liverpool. But obviously, the big questions then remain of what happens with the midfield and the first team this summer. If there is a massive overhaul in terms of Jude Bellingham's and Mason Mount's coming through the door, then it's going to be hard for any youth team player to kind of break in that respect. So I think there's certainly plenty of decisions to be made, but I think it's at this moment in time, I think it's maybe slightly early to kind of predict who will feature more next season.
Yeah, I think the point you made there about the summer overhaul, because Liverpool's spending is going to have to be on the midfield. They're going to need 2, 3, at least 2 first-team midfielders. They're probably going to need a centre-half, maybe 2 centre-halves. So I think that actually might leave a spot in the attack. If Roberto Firmino needs replacing, I don't know if they necessarily need a Roberto Firmino replacement. I think that attack is maybe missing a replacement with pace and a bit of width and skill. And Ben Doak can certainly provide that. And Kay Gordon, if he gets fit, can provide that too, can't he? I mean, that's the thing I think they're missing in attack at the moment.
I think as well, like that's it, isn't it? If you look at Bajcetic, I know people obviously were touting him for kind of big things quietly down at the academy. There's always a thing of that, especially when Liverpool signed him, that they made a really decent signing there, and obviously beat the Brexit deadline to do that. Obviously beat United and beat Real Madrid to him as well. But I don't think anyone, if you'd sat down and spoke to anyone at the academy last summer, I don't think anyone would have said that he would have started against Real Madrid at Anfield in the Champions League, knockout rounds. And I think that is purely because, as fantastic as a player he was, he sees the opportunity that, Fabinho was well out of form, and he was able to profit from that. But, if Fabinho had been, at the heights of his previous seasons, would he have, played as many games as he had them? Well, probably not. And
maybe even Fabinho now, he's in pretty good form in the past couple of weeks, isn't he? It's
really
sliding doors.
He's exactly that. That's it, isn't it? So he's obviously profited from that, but that was his opportunity to kind of come through and show his talent. He's obviously become a better player, but he wasn't awful at the academy. He was a very decent player, but it's just about getting opportunities. And as you say, is if Roberto Firmino isn't replaced, then there will be more opportunities you'd suspect in the cup competitions, which you'd imagine Liverpool will be stronger in next season. And even if, in the kind of latter stage of the Champions League group stages, Liverpool kind of always tend to wrap up the group, relatively easily. So there could be opportunities there. But, in midfield, as you say, if they're bringing in 2 or 3, big names, and then you've obviously got the likes of James Milner, Jordan Henderson, and those kind of players still around, it would be a big ask, I think, regardless of the ability for someone to kind of break through that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very exciting and big summer ahead. We obviously know that Jurgen Klopp and John Henry are hopefully going to make some transfers. But for the academy as well, I think there are going to be some opportunities for those players, as we mentioned, to get those loan moves, maybe even some to get a shot at the first 2. I think Doak may be one of those. Well, Matt, let's round off our show then, as we always do on the Academy Show, with your player to watch from the academy. Who are you going to choose this time?
Yeah, I teased it at the top of the show. Didn't want to give anything away, but I'm going to go with Keifer Figueroa, who's been away representing his US men's national team under 17s age group. He's one of the standouts that's coming through. There's been a couple of US-based players that have come across to Liverpool, and Matteo Retaccio is the other one who's maybe fallen a little bit down the pecking order, and has maybe. I think certainly the time has passed for him to become a first teamer at Liverpool. But Keifer is 16 years of age. He's the son of former Premier League star Maino Figueroa, who people will remember from his days at Wigan and Hull. But the opposite end of the pitch, a centre forward, and it's still really early days. As I mentioned, he's only 16, so we've not seen loads of at the academy. He's made a few appearances for the under 18s this season and has impressed when he has been featuring. But I think the tournament, it was the CONCACAF under 17s championship, I think it's called, which is one of those that I'm sure most people won't have seen much, if any, of those games. But I think the record sort of speaks for itself, really. I think he scored 7 goals. I think only one player in the tournament scored more than he did. They got to the final as well. They lost out to Mexico in the end. But I think that's it's a really exciting one to look at. I think when a little bit like the UEFA Youth League, really. If you've got a player who does it domestically and can kind of do it where you're comfortable and where you kind of know your surroundings, I think that's one thing. But to go out and do it on the international stage like that is really, really important. And I think he must have missed games for the under 18s as he's gone away and done that, but obviously will have done that with Liverpool's blessing, and rightly so, because it's a big step forward in his career. So yeah, one to watch, I think, more sort of over the next maybe 3 or 4 years rather than the next 3 or 4 months, like some of the others that we've spoken about on the podcast. But yeah, I think he's definitely a name to keep an eye on, and it's always good to see a sort of regen, if you like, a former Premier League player coming back again. Obviously, Bobby Clark is another one of those as well. So yeah, he's the one to watch for this show.
Yeah, I've anticipated one of you selecting him. I had a little look, and he looks absolutely rapid from the clips I've seen. Scored a last-minute equaliser, I think, for Liverpool recently as well, the under-18 side. Keifer, has Matt chosen your shout there as well, or have you got a different player for us?
Well, initially I had penciled down Bobby Clark, but obviously we've gone quite heavy with the Bobby Clark chat. So if we're kind of going away and maybe doing a bit of a curveball or under the radar shout, I'm going to go with Lee Jonas, purely just because I thought he was brilliant against Porto last week. Spoke to Barry Lutis about him after the game, and obviously Gerard Quansah and Billy Cometio. Obviously, Cometio is not obviously eligible for the Youth League, but those have been the two centre halves certainly in kind of last 12 months who have been touted for big things, especially Cometio at Liverpool. Quansah's obviously now joined Bristol Rovers on loan until the end of the season, so Jonas has been tasked with kind of stepping up, and obviously still only 18, and he was alongside Terence Miles at the heart of the defence the other night, and I just thought he was brilliant. The way he kind of just commanded everything, and as I say, I don't think there was much control in the game in terms of the referee, and there was an element that he could maybe spiral out of control in terms of some of the tackles that were going in. But he was one of those who was not a silent leader, but he kind of led by example in terms of how he handled himself on and off the ball. And that's not the first time, to be fair, that I've been impressed with him. Obviously, he has been playing at right back earlier in the season and at times last season with the under-18s. But I think in the absence of Quansah, he's really stepped up and kind of started to get that recognition that he has deserved. Obviously, he got the red card against Arsenal on Monday in the Premier League 2, which, on review, I think it was a very soft red card. But, obviously that won't affect his involvement in the UEFA Youth League. So, as we talk about players at the top end of the pitch who could potentially decide that tie in Lisbon next week, obviously it's going to be, the likes of Miles and Jonas and Harvey Davis at the back end of the pitch, who are, going to be, tasked with keeping a clean sheet against a Sporting side that scored 5 goals against Ajax in the last round. So, yeah, he would be my shout. He's for any boxing fans, he's the nephew of Natasha Jonas. So there's every day is a school day on the Blood Red podcast. But no, he's certainly one, probably in a similar bracket to as Keiro Figueroa in terms of not one who you maybe immediately see step up to the first team next season, as you think, Quansah and Cometio might get another chance, if Liverpool don't make those signings. But certainly, stepping up again in the Premier League 2 as a fully fledged under 21s player next season, and then maybe you could see him appear in the cup competitions in the years to come. But yeah, I've been really impressed with him, so I just thought he kind of deserved a bit of recognition, which I'm sure he'll be pleased about to get a shout out on the Blood Red podcast. So yeah, he's my one to watch.
Wow, absolutely. I mean, I never knew that the Academy had such a star-studded press box with obviously the Liverpool Echoes, but then also the family section as well with Mino Figueroa and Natasha Jonas. Really, really good stuff. But yeah, 2 very exciting players, definitely ones to keep eyes on. And of course, we will be doing that. Hopefully, with a few more of these Academy shows, we're going to hope and revive them a bit more. So as time will tell who the next Stefan Bajcetic will be. But for now, we'll wrap things up there. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and watching along. As I said, I hope you enjoyed our revival of this Academy show. We'll be sure to keep you in the loop of everything that goes on as Kirby. I mean, when I say we, I mean our brilliant contributors such as Matt and Keifer will keep you in the loop with all of that information. Make sure that everyone that you subscribe to Blood Red on YouTube or whichever platform you get your podcasts from, be it Apple, Spotify, and many others, so you don't miss any of our content, such as our main Blood Red podcast tomorrow. But for now, that wraps up the Academy show. Thank you so much for joining us. Catch you again soon.